Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we are going to discuss the deciduous teeth. This is the deciduous maxillary center incisor. The labial surface of this is trapezoidal. There is increased mesiodistal diameter of the crown. The mesio-incisal angle is rounded. The disto-incisal angle is also more rounded than the mesio-incisal and disto-incisal angle of the permanent maxillary center incisor. You can see in this permanent maxillary center incisor, this mesio-incisal angle is sharp and this disto-incisal angle is a bit rounded. There are no mammillons on the incisor surface of the deciduous maxillary center incisor, and it has a flat incisor surface, whereas in permanent maxillary center incisors, there are mental depressions and mammillons can also be present. There is a prominent bulge. There is a prominent bulge on the labial surface of the. There is a prominent bulge on the labial surface of the deciduous maxillary central incisor due to the presence of cervical ridge here, labial cervical ridge on the labial surface. Horizontal cervical ridge is here. So due to that, there is a pronounced bulge on the labial surface. Now coming to the lingual surface, there is a pronounced cingulum here and prominent marginal ridges. These are the marginal ridges, and this is the pronounced cingulum. There is a deeper lingual fossa. This is lingual fossa, which is deeper, but there is no lingual pit. Now coming to the medial aspect. The medial aspect is wider labiolingually. The cervical line exhibits less curvature incisally. On the distal surface, this is the distal surface, the cervical line curvature is also less as compared to the mesial surface, where the cervical line curvature is more as compared to the distal surface. This is the incisal aspect. You can see that the incisal edge is straight. It divides the crown into two equal labial and lingual portions. This is labial portion and this is lingual portion. There is greater mesio-distal width. There is a single root. It tapers evenly to the apex. Root is sometimes labially deflected, like in this case it is labially directed. The root is longer relative to the crown length. Now coming to the maxillary lateral incisor. This is maxillary deciduous lateral incisor. It is much smaller than the central incisor. You can see, compare the size difference here. This deciduous maxillary central incisor is larger than the maxillary deciduous lateral incisor. The labial aspect is trapezoidal. Crown is wider incisor-cervically than mesio-distally. The distal incisal angle is more rounded than the mesio-incisal angle, which is sharp. Coming to the lingual surface, this is your lingual surface. The marginal ridges on the lingual surfaces are more prominent. There is a deeper lingual fossa. The incisal aspect is much narrower than the incisal aspect of the maxillary deciduous central incisor. You can see mesio-distally it is wider, but the lateral incisal aspect is mesio-distally narrower. It is more rhomboidal and more convex. The lateral incisor root is relatively longer than the root of the maxillary central incisor. You can see that the root of the lateral incisor is a bit longer. Compare it, a bit longer in lateral incisor. The apex is usually sharp and not so rounded. Coming to the mandibular central incisor. This is the mandibular central incisor. The mandibular central incisor is usually larger than the mandibular deciduous lateral incisor. The mandibular central incisor is larger than this lateral incisor. In size, it is reverse of the permanent teeth in which the permanent mandibular central incisor is the smallest tooth in the oral cavity, whereas the permanent mandibular lateral incisor is larger. This is the permanent mandibular central incisor. This is permanent mandibular lateral incisor. You can see that this tooth is larger than this central incisor. The deciduous mandibular central incisor has a chisel shaped incisor morphology. The medial incisal angle is sharp. Distal incisal angle is also sharp, and at 90° make 90° angle to the cervical line. Incisal edge is straight with no mamelons. There is smooth labial surface lacking developmental depressions. It is flatter than the labial surfaces of the permanent incisors. So the deciduous central incisor is flatter than the labial surface of the permanent incisors. This is permanent incisor, this is deciduous central incisor. It is labially symmetrical crown. There is a bulge on the labial surface at the cemento-enamel junction due to the cervical ridge. On lingual surface, this is the lingual surface, there is a well-developed cingulum. This is cingulum. The marginal ridges are less defined, similar to the marginal ridges of the mandibular permanent central incisor, and also less defined than that of the maxillary deciduous central incisor. There is a shallow lingual fossa. Proximal aspect is triangular in shape. Incisal edge is located over the long axis of the root. Here you can say it is located on the long axis of the root. The cervical line contour. Cervical line is evenly curved towards the incisal. There is a greater labiolingual width than that of permanent incisors. The distal aspect shows less depth of curvature towards the incisal. Coming to the incisal aspect, it has a straight incisal edge which divides the crown into two equal labial and lingual portions. In deciduous maxillary central incisor, the crown was wider mesiodistally. but in this case it is not so wide. The medial and distal portions of the crowns are symmetrical. The root is single, long and cylinder or thin. There are convex labial and lingual surfaces, but the mesial and distal surfaces of the root are flat, whereas the labial and lingual surfaces are convex. These are the labial surface of the root, which is convex. This is the lingual surface of the root, which is convex. The mesial surface or proximal surface of the roots are flattened. Coming to the deciduous lateral incisor, it is similar in form to the this deciduous central incisor. The disto-incisal angle is rounded. This is the disto-incisal angle, it is rounded. The mesio-incisal angle, this is the mesio-incisal angle, which is sharp. This mesio-incisal angle is sharp. The incisal outline slopes slightly towards the distal. There is a less sloping towards the distal, whereas in permanent lateral incisor there is more sloping. This is permanent lateral incisor, mandibular lateral incisor. You can appreciate that there is more sloping, and there is also distolingual twist. So in this case, in deciduous lateral incisor, there is less sloping towards the incisor surface towards the distal. The cingulum and the marginal ridges are a little larger than that of the central incisor. Lingual fossa is little deeper. The crown is, from the incisal aspect, the crown is not symmetrical, and the cingulum bulges towards the distal. It is directed distally. There is a single root. The root is larger or longer than that of the central incisor. Here we are going to try to compare. You can see that this lateral incisor root is a bit longer. There is apically there is distal curvature, distally bent or curvature. There is distal longitudinal groove on the root. Coming to the maxillary canine. This is maxillary canine. mesio-distal width of this tooth is greater than the incisor cervical or crown height. From the labial or lingual aspect, the crown is diamond shaped. You can see it is resembling like a diamond. There are rounder medial and distal outlines. The medial and distal outlines overhang the cervical line, this cervical line, and these outlines are overhanging the cervical line. The medial and distal contacts are located at the same level incisor-cervically. The medial cusp slope is longer than the distal cusp slope. The medial cusp slope is longer than the distal cusp slope, which is shorter. This is the left one. This medial cusp slope is longer than the distal cusp slope, which is shorter. There is no labial ridge or depressions or developmental depressions. No labial ridge or developmental depression. There are no imbrication lines. There is a well developed cingulum here, and the marginal ridges are prominent. Prominent marginal ridges. The mediolingual and distolingual fossa are present. A tubercle is often present, which starts from the cusp tip of the canine and ends in the tubercle. Starts from the tubercle starts from the cusp tip of the canine to the cingulum. The medial aspect. This is the medial aspect. It is triangular in shape. The labial margin. This is labial margin. It is convex, incisors cervically. The lingual margin is concave in the incisal portion and convex in the cervical portion or cervical half. Labolingually, the tooth is thicker. The cervical line curvature towards the incisor is less. The distal aspect is similar to the medial aspect, which is also triangular in shape. The cervical line shows less curvature towards the incisor. This curvature is less. The incisal aspect is rhomboidal in outline. It exhibits more rounding than the permanent canine incisal aspect. This is permanent canine incisal aspect. You can see that this deciduous canine incisal aspect is more rounded. Cusp tip is upset towards the distal due to longer mesial incisor slope or mesial cusp slope. There is a single root. Root is approximately twice the length of the crown. The root is wider labilingually wider than mesiodistally. So this labilingually it is wider than mesiodistally. Coming to the mandibular canine. The mandibular canine is smaller and slimmer tooth than the maxillary canine. You can see that this maxillary canine is overall larger and thicker tooth than this mandibular canine, which is slimmer. The mesiodistal width of the mandibular primary canine is less than the mesiodistal width of maxillary primary canine. You can say this mesiodistal width is longer. The incisor cervical